First of all, thank you all for coming and recognizing that we have a different venue. I'm hoping no one is over at the library banging to get in. But as Walter explained, it made perfect sense to have the meeting here so we could reference the pictures. I think most of you are members of the Historical Society. For anybody who's not, I'd love to talk with you after the meeting and get you to join our organization. We have a calendar that comes out every January, usually a couple of newsletters during the year, several programs during the year, and we field inquiries all the time from current and former residents about information about their classmates or whatever. We have every yearbook that's been issued by the Ardsley High School. So if we can ever be of service to you, please feel free to get in touch. Most of you who have lived in Ardsley for a while know who Walter was, or excuse me, who Walter is. I say was because
never mind.
He was a resident for 50 years here in Ardsley. He moved up to White Plains as part of a downsizing effort that many of us do in our later years. And you know, he provided many years of service. I think it was 43 years of service, Walter, counting both judge and trustee.
I lost count.
Okay, but definitely a major part of Ardsley government over the years. He's been a member of the Ardsley Historical Society for many of those years. He was village historian. He's a frequent presenter at our programs, a wealth of knowledge, as you all know if you've heard Walter speak before.
So we're here for a couple of reasons. The obvious ones are front and back of me. Because where else but in the seat of government, and this is the seat of government, and has been since, I think, was the year this building up in 1999, I think it was? Anyway, so there's 20 years. But the history of Ardsley goes back more than 100 years. It goes back to 1896. And we're going to talk about, not all of these people, because 100 years is going to finish right here when John Morehouse was still mayor for another year until 19. So where did the name president come from? Where did the name mayor come from? Well, the name president kind of followed our national government, who called the chief executive of a village president. And then in 1927, I don't know why that is the year, but they got together in the state and they said, let's find a different title. Maybe president was confusing to some, whatever the reason is. So let's change the title, and they did, statewide, effective April 4th, 1927. So, because the elections were in March in those days for all the villages in the state, and April 4th would be probably the first Monday in the month, and that's when the new board would take over. So it wasn't a change in midterm, it was a change at the inception of a new term of chief executive of a village board. And so they changed the title to mayor. One of these officers or officials served both as president and as mayor with a term interrupted. So when you add them up, just like when we include Grover Cleveland twice, you know, because his two terms were separated by another president in between, the count doesn't always come out exactly the same in terms of mayors at the same time. So we begin with Daniel Lawrence. Our George Washington. No, he wasn't a general, but he was our first president, so we're going to try to find George Washington. And I'm semi-serious when I say that. I didn't intend to just say this, because they need somebody, rules of ethics in the Ardsley Historical Society, but they're my prominent, well-respected, that's what I was looking for. So when the servant was the first president, where, because they didn't know that government. And this was incorporated village. Well, he got elected. 34 people came out to vote. 3 of those votes were disqualified. Viewers, I think, will be. But anyway, so here's the information I have about Daniel Lawrence. That's the first picture of the village. First, he was president for 2 terms, from 1896 to 1899. He was elected on February 11, 1896, and then re-elected 6 years later. So he had served as chairman of the Incorporation Committee in 1896. He was an Ardsley resident for a quarter of a century before his election. He lived on Emperor Avenue, which is located where the thruway now is. His front street was called Emperor Avenue. Anyway, it was correctly on that as well, because as you may know that, we were here before the thruway was built. So I said, and he was a butcher. Well, probably the only one in town, other than his son, who was the very president. 100 years of the restaurant owner. So that's kind of, he died in 1901, and then widowed his son. I think that his administration enacted the first ordinances, bylaws, and police regulations in April of 1896. And he served with the original trustees, William Odell, D.J. Hill, and so. And there is Daniel Lawrence, his first picture, 1972. George Bush president, and 17 mayors headed the ordinance. And then came William Lawrence, one of them Ardsley's second president. The longest term was Burrell, who stayed in the list, who has been long since. Once said that she found a little marking on one of her sidewalk concrete panels, cement panels, and it was W or lawyers, O-D or W-I, is that O, isn't that right? And you weren't sure. Did you ever, were you ever able to figure it? He's lived in that house for a long time. His son saw him over breakfast in the sun in front of the village. But anyway, so it may be. I'm going to read from. So William Odell was the second president. He served the longest of any. Almost 13 years, 5 years until 1912. So who was William Odell? He was probably the most prominent businessman. 31 years. Odell was a member of the jury notes. All of the early grads were. I'm going to ask those questions. And most of those were your applicants. Or accommodated, it wasn't found until 1927. He was also on the Ashford Avenue School Building Committee in 1912, when that school opened shortly thereafter. He died at the age of 62 in 1920. Keep away. In investigating, no, that's not. So we begin with researching the life of Odell. I came up with this general, very interesting first president. So the survey's going on in Washington 25 years ago. And I found his original. I'm semi-serious when I say that. And original wills. Usually wills don't tell you too much information. They're kind of straightforward. They don't want to be too revealing. But if there's an inventory of an estate in the will file, or in the accounting file, and there was, in the case of when he covered up, my gosh, it was an inventory of his business, Incorporated Village, William I. Well, he had all that coal, 30 or 40, whatever. 3 of those votes were disqualified for reasons I don't. So, the third president from 19, if you want to research that, I don't know if you have been a village trustee, it's always curious about it. Maybe that they didn't know him. He was also a butcher. They were all men, hence he acquired the name Butcher, Schwartz. He lived on Ardsley Avenue, and right next door was his next door neighbor, Dr. Johnson, and suffrage, who drove his little buggy and made house calls. In the first election, many years, what I showed before, but it wasn't only the president. William Lawrence held several offices with the Ardsley Board of Education until his death at age 84. Ancestors, 1944. Also voted the right treasurer. He was also superintendent of the county poorhouse. So during the terms of what we had presidents, our government was a little different because his successor over there was the Everett Macy. Am I giving you too many details? Because to carry on, according to Arthur Silliman in the book he wrote, William Lawrence was a Republican. He was issues. He wore a brown derby, and a flower in his buttonhole, a friend to all, especially his school children, an active citizen. And there he is. I love the picture. So we have that distinction. But anyway, so here's the information. And then in 1927, another Republican, but he was president for 2 progressive, 1896, and if you want to apply, he was defeated, and that was Frank Adams in 1896. So after 11 years as village president, William Lawrence stepped in. During his tenure, the new schoolhouse was completed. It was opened in 1913. The Great Fire was in 1914. the old municipal building, the second municipal building. We opened, the school had been in 1915, and women's suffrage was granted in New York State in 1917. And received, as I said, all 30. And now we go to Frank Adams. So Frank Adams is my hero. Adams, we call it Addyman. I call it Adams. And here is Frank Adams. He served 2 terms, 1933, and he was elected in 1925 as village president. And then,
Walter, can you speak
yes,
a little louder?
certainly, Barbara, thank you, Bob. And then Frank Adams stepped down. He had a lot of interest, probably the only one in town, which I'm going to go into in a moment, where he did a full program about Frank Adams, and we got in touch with a couple of his grandsons who lived in Georgia or Alabama. First 40 years ago, and then Frank Adams decided that 2 terms was enough, and he stepped down. But he came back 4 years later. The title was then made. So he had 2 terms. And then, while he was still very active in many circles, there were rumors that he was going to run for supervisor in the second house. He had been a military commander. He organized the American Legion Post, and his wife was head of the sidewalk. He was a very renowned dog breeder and kennel. He had a kennel business on his 15-acre property on 601 Ashford Avenue, which has just been developed. He was involved in so many activities. He was president of the lumber company, very prominent business on Soma River Road. And he had been a major in World War I. He sent colonels to reserves. He was vice president of the First National Bank in Ardsley, one of the founders of the first Ardsley Public Library in 1923, which was on the second floor of the old municipal building. And he had just returned from Washington, D.C., where he had gone down in March of 1934 in his second term as mayor. 7 years as board president, and 4 years, 3 years later. And when he was in Washington, he judged some dog shows. As I say, he was very proud. And he had a 20-year conversation with FDR later about how conversation with FDR over a sewer project in Ardsley. Ardsley didn't have sewers, and he was looking for grants. He was proud of a loan before the sewer project. This was in the beginning of April of 1977. In June of 1927, that project was approved. And that Saturday, requested by Washington, D.C. So, but in the interim, later though, there's more property down in the mine. He came back from Washington, a large house. Last time I looked, it's still standing on Lincoln Avenue, right near you. Very large house. They gave him a military training next week. He did major, lieutenant colonel, would have gotten. But, and it may have changed over the years on the outside. He doesn't last about it, which was maybe 15 years ago. Quezon resembled a 100-year-old house that only a president of Schwartz would have lived in. Avenue, because school children came out that day. He had made his way up Soma River Road onto Ardsley, very proud. And his Odell was a member of the Methodist Church Building Committee. All of the early presidents who were Methodists are interested people who lived in Francis. So Frank Adams was my hero, PhD, because although I'm not detracting from anybody else, he was also on the service as a school building. He was so widely respected, well, not only on a local level, but on a national level. He died at the age of 62 in 1920. World War I, investigating, accounting methods, researching. So Clifton Smith lived on a house at 551 Ashford Avenue, which was later occupied by Robert Pellegrino and by his brother, his wife and brother-in-law. What's their last name again? Palladino. Okay. And a few years ago, Rob found a letter that had been stashed away somewhere. When I say stashed away, but it had been found in the house. An inventory of his business. Smiths Dr. Smith had his dental practice there. It was conveniently located on Ashford Avenue. Ashford Avenue is zoned that you could have a business provided you, or a practice provided you also live in the house. You can't separate them and have your business and live elsewhere. But anyway, that's where he was. Okay. So Clifton Smith was the first mayor by title from 1927 to 1931. He didn't run for office after 31, so everybody kind of stepped aside when Adam decided to come back to village life, in village office. He moved to Somers in 1978, he died in 1982. He and his wife Emily went to kindergarten together all through school. They were married for 62 years. During his tenure, Beacon Hill Estates opened in 1929. Did I say 1938? We're right next to 1929, where he first hospital. And that's about all I know. Dr. Smith, many, as that was introduced. But August Sykes, so his name Sykes is familiar to some of you. He was a dentist. Paul Sykes, I'm talking about, who lived over here. He was still superintendent of the county courthouse on Orlando, thanks. But August Sykes lived on Ashford Avenue, and he was his uncle. So Sykes stepped in. He had been a village trustee, and when Adam died, Sykes stepped in to carry it. According to Arthur Silverman, he was Ardsley's third mayor for 11 years, from 1934 to 1945, which was the longest tenure of any mayor. He had been acting mayor and trustee when Adam died. He was a founding member of the Ardsley Lions Club and later its president, vice president and director of the First National Bank in Ardsley. He played Santa Claus at the Methodist Men's Club Christmas party. He was a jeweler and diamond merchant in New York City. He lived at 541 Ashford Avenue by Park Avenue. And during his tenure, here you go, Peter, you asked me this question last time you met. Taft, McKinley, and Lincoln Avenues opened in 1930. During his tenure, the oil burner code was enacted. Did you want to know that also? Same year. And the traffic light was approved for Ashford Avenue in Abington, which they just took away a few years ago, and now we want it back. But it's too late. He passed away in 1974. He was followed by Charles Borchers. So where am I going now? And now we go, so here is C. William Borchers and Charles Borchers. He was mayor from 45 to 48. Had been commander of the Ardsley American Legion Post, president of the local Lions Club. There were a lot of those organizations in those days, mostly for men. President. He lived at number 4 Addington Avenue, across from Mayor Denari. He was a banker by profession. Frank Adams stepped down. His wife was killed a lot of in the city's subway. All you know about. 2 children. Mail delivery in Ardsley began in houses rather than going to pick it up from the post office. That was in 1948 during his tenure. Did not say he had anything to do with it, just pointing it out. And of course, he came back 4 years later. And the next one, did I finish that page? One more. We've got one more. Fran McCormick. So here's Fran McCormick. Now, when we needed a picture where the judge, there it is, third from the left, we didn't have a picture of Fran McCormick. I couldn't imagine we had no picture of Fran McCormick except this picture. So he was very headshot, dog breeder, and kennel. Yeah, so this is a picture of T. Higley, who served as a judge. But neither Fran McCormick nor his predecessor activities as president or as Dow were lawyers. So they chose not to wear judge's robes and were entitled to it. He had been a major. So that's why Lieutenant Colonel deserves this picture. He was a vice judge, First National Bank, and Ardsley, one of the founders. But Fran McCormick, whom I got to know very, he was a gentleman. He was mayor from 48 to 49 after serving as village trustee from 1943. He had been a school board trustee. Now, there are 4 positions, elected positions, in the village of Ardsley. School board trustee, or Fran McCormick. He had his second in 1930. Village trustee, yes, 1943. Mayor of the village, yes, he was elected mayor of the village is 48, and judge of the village. And he was in Washington, so he was elected to all those four positions. Judge. He died at age 89 in 1983. As I may have mentioned before, I attended his funeral. He lived in number 5 Judson Avenue with his wife Margaret and 6 children. He was one of the founders of OLPH, and I believe the first Catholic borough. And he was affectionately as friend. This was in, so now they begin with, in June of 1927. Now in 1949, 1951. And this is what I have to say about him. He was actually mayor less than one term. So he served from 1949 to 1950. No, that's wrong. That says 1951. Maybe that was the reason for your question. He had been a village trustee from 47 to 49, president of the Lions Club, member of the volunteer fire department, married 2 daughters. I have him at 7 Abington Avenue from 1939 to 1950. Why did he resign? And I said already, no one had been impeached. He left Ardsley for South America with the U.S. Rubber Company, for whom he worked for 54 years. He returned to the U.S. in 1954, settled in Yonkers, where he lived until his death at age 89 in 1993. During his term, 21 acres was opened. You know, that's that project, that development of Ashford Avenue coming toward the north. And also Highly Estates Phase 1 was approved, as well as the relocation of the railway station from the east side of the tracks to the opposite side. In 1950, village population was 2,267, about half of what it is currently, 45. Now ready for any questions? So that's Albert Denari.
I didn't
Yes.
realize, I'm sorry, Franklin Cemetery, when did that start?
Franklin?
Yeah.
Franklin began by the Lutherans around 1908.
Oh, wow.
And the only headstones that you see are in the first 10 or 15 years, because then it was reestablished. And ultimately, mausoleums are there,
Right.
and some famous people that are obviously, we use the word interred, we don't say buried.
So
because
what
they-
did Lucito do, among other things? He was a musician and he was manager of a singing
Most
group.
famous person was Judy.
He was
Garland.
postmaster at
Left
Chauncey
went back
Station,
to Hollywood a couple of years
just down
ago.
the road
Yeah.
where
One of the
Mount
trustees
Cemetery
was,
is.
his name was Walter.
His trustees included a couple of people pretty famous in Ardsley, Bill Watson, Bernie Forrest, Charlie Hennon. During his tenure, the Putnam Railroad line discontinued its operation. I guess he couldn't stop that either.
Frank Allen is.
The New York Thruway opened, and the new high school was completed in '57. Preliminary work on the zoning code and Mary Cannon's began working in the village office.
Any other questions?
Served here.
Yes.
Was
For 41
Odell
years.
related to the Odell name?
So there's Luzito. So
Probably-
now we'll go to Dan Reedy. So, I was talking to a friend here who lives in Ardsley. She grew up in Ardsley. She went to school in Ardsley.
School trustee.
She's about, I'd say, in her mid-60s. We were having lunch yesterday. She couldn't make it for the program.
So
So I
Odell
said
is
to
a very
her,
famous name in
um,
that area.
Gee, you must have remembered Dan Reedy.
Now, if you ask
Only thing I can remember
whether Lawrence Street
was that he was
goes
very
from 98
handsome.
to the Salt Department is named after
She might have said
Lawrence,
distinguished,
or even William
but
Lawrence.
She was a girl at that point when he was, when he served his 8 years as mayor. And here he is, very handsome and very distinguished. Absolutely, he's got pen in hand.
So I don't think it had any.
Maybe he's doing that for the New York State Constitutional Convention, the last time he had a constitutional convention, when was that, 1968? Because he was a member up there. He was an insurance executive, he was a lawyer, he was a staunch Republican, and he had a Republican board, so he didn't have too much problem in getting things across. He knew how to be mayor. He was elected for 4 terms. Insurance executive. He lived with his wife and 2 children at 73 Beacon.
A lot, too much.
So he's
And that may be where I tread on
from my neck of the woods, because we lived
So,
together. And during the
Daniel
Highway
Lawrence
State, so he
was
lived
an
in
independent, I mean, there were no parties.
He served in World War
There
II.
were no parties
He
when
was
George
commander of
Washington
reserves.
was first.
He was president of the New York State Conference of Mayors, delegate to the State
So,
Constitutional
now I
Convention,
learn,
president of Columbia University Alumni Association. Wow. Also co-founder of the Ardsley Ambulance Corps. 1962, it says. First mayor from the Huntley Estates area, I read that already. Presided over, okay, I did that. But he had the first female trustee on his board. Her name?
Yes.
Helen Thompson. I remember her. She did secretarial work, and the first
more
ran for
liberal
office. She was the person to go to, because she
And
had
then I think the
names,
first
very
Democrat
obliging.
comes all the way here in 1940.
Her services,
Fran
very
McCoy.
prompt as
Who
well.
may also, and I was asking this question when I
He
wrote-
died in 1985 at age 80.
was asking
The Ashford
who
Avenue
the
Park
first
project
Catholic
began,
president
police
was.
code, OLPH
Because
school
that's
opened
often
in 60,
associated with Democrats
village population
in the old
4,011 in 1960.
Careful when I say that.
So now comes Richard Payne,
But I think Fran McCormick was.
and
definitely
he
the first
served from
Democrat.
67 to 68. We
And I
arrived
think
in
he gets the
68,
first Catholic.
but he had just left. After 11 months in office, he resigned to move to a larger home in New Rochelle with his wife and 5 children. Needed a bigger house. He lived at number 28 Eastern Drive, which was next door to John Morehouse, who later became
So
mayor.
your question asked.
He was a Democrat. He had run unsuccessfully for trustee a couple of years earlier. It was hard for Democrats to get elected at that point.
Just to tell you what
He
the
did it.
Democratic presidents were, real quick, or
And
mayors.
he served as a
Democrat.
volunteer painter of house interiors in Harlem.
Democrat
Good
Zito,
for him.
Democrat.
So there's Richard Payne. He worked for
Howell,
a company,
David,
C-E-Y-O.
Democrat slash turned
I
Republican.
know that Gus
Like
Merrick
Poco's.
also
Democrat, Democrat.
corporate lawyer, so they both worked for the same company.
Current.
And that's about it. I never met Dick Payne.
But, okay, so I'm ready again. Okay, so, I served my first 2 years as an independent. I think from time I was a Republican. The board was 3 Democrats. Yeah, no, he definitely did.
They don't intersect.
And then I served my last 2 years on the board, second
Well,
term, with,
in those
one
days,
Democrat
most
for a
people,
year,
I was surprised when I
and the
saw
rest
the
were
Republican
Republicans
Daisy
for my
Adams, but I did find it independent because most of the
So I
people
got to see
lived
both,
over
and the
here.
difference
Because
between
that
the
was
two.
the old section.
Bud
New
Powell
sections didn't
had
come until
inherited the
Beacon
job
Hill Estates was 1938.
by a vote of his
I think.
colleagues, Democrats,
The Heatherville
when Dick
property,
Payne moved
Huntley
on to
property,
New
rather,
Rochelle with his wife and 5 children, as I
1951.
said. And Bud,
So you didn't have too many people up there.
was,
Must have been large houses scattered
I'm
around,
gonna say this really
but
carefully.
that's all I can tell.
Anyway.
Not a great leader. That wasn't his thing. He
That's
was
a
a
good
nice
topic.
person,
So,
good family
we
member.
now
go to page 2. What am I doing time-wise? Gotta speak. Religious individual. So, but he wasn't a strong mayor, and he was influenced by people. But he and Hal Dinan, who was your next door neighbor, Leonard, this is Leonard Lindy's
So
friend.
I've covered Frank Adam and both as
Were
president and
an
mayor.
incredible team. They were a dynamic duo.
Lived on a house, I think it's
Because they had nothing in
551 Ashford Avenue, which was
And they
later occupied
brought
by
2
Robert
different
Polino
constituencies
and by his
into
brother,
their
his wife and
campaigns.
brother-in-law. What's their last name?
Blue collar, Hal Dinan was
Paladino,
deputy
Robert
mayor for
Paladino.
many years.
Okay.
Mayor. He was a banker
And a
down
few
in
years
Chase
ago,
Bank.
Rob found a letter.
He didn't shy away from speaking.
Stashed away somewhere, I didn't say stashed away.
He didn't shy away from
But it
speaking.
had been found in the house.
Bud was really very quiet.
The Smiths,
And the other
Dr.
trustees,
Smith had his
Lillian
dental
Steen,
practice there, so
trustee,
it's conveniently located on
council,
Ashford Avenue.
and
Ashford
the other
Avenue
ones
was
were
over,
like trying to
you
get
could have a
things
business
done.
provided you,
And
or a practice.
we had a very
provided
strong
you
board.
something.
Walter Nyman was president of
You can't
WQXR.
separate them And have your business, et cetera,
and
elsewhere.
But
But anyway,
we didn't get a whole
that's
lot
where
done during
he
that
was.
time, until Dick Fontana came in.
So Clifton Smith was the first
Other
mayor.
things I want to
by
add
title
about
in
Bud Powell, John
1927,
was his first name.
1931.
He was a
He didn't run
trustee
for
in
office after
'67, he served
so
9 years
kind
as
of stepped
mayor.
aside when Adam decided to
Again,
come
he was appointed by his colleagues
back.
after the
He
resignation
moved to
of
Somers in
Payne,
1978.
and then
died in
elected 4
1982.
times.
He and his wife Emily went to
Married, 4
kindergarten
children, lived
together,
at 13
all through
Highland
school.
Drive
They
in
were
the
married
Huntley
for
area.
62
He was
years.
active in the fire
During his
company
tenure,
for sure.
Hill Estates
And had a
opened.
lot of support there, and also the American Legion. He worked for IBM in the purchasing department. During his tenure, Ashford Park opened,
And that's
a
what I
storefront
wanted.
library,
Dr. Smith.
middle school opened in '71, village's 75th anniversary.
Judge Marin became a
August
judge in
Sykes.
'74,
Name Sykes is familiar to some of you.
and he
He
defeated
was a dentist.
Dick Fontana,
Paul Sykes.
the lone Republican, twice, handily,
Handily.
until an event took place
But August Sykes lived on Ashford Avenue, and he was his uncle. So
As a
Sykes
result,
stepped in, he had been a village trustee.
Dick Fontana wasn't even going to run. The Republicans didn't even have a candidate until 3.5 weeks before the election. Dick Fontana
He was
turned the
Ardsley's
tide
third
three
mayor
times,
for
became
11
in charge
years,
of his
from
expression.
1934 to 1940.
First, let me tell you about Dick
Longest
Fontana.
tenure of any mayor.
He had been village trustee from
was an
72
acting
to
mayor and
77,
trustee when Adam died.
the lone Republican.
He was a founding
He was
member
mayor
of the
from
Ardsley
77 to
Lions Club,
83,
and
that's
president,
that's
vice
6 years,
president,
3 terms.
director of the First National Bank in Ardsley.
As I said, he
Late
defeated
Santa Claus
Bud Powell
at the
after
Methodist
losing
Men's
to him
Club
twice.
Christmas party.
He retired
He
after
was
3
a jeweler
terms.
and diamond
He
merchant.
lived at
in
93
City.
Beacon Hill Road, which
Lived
is a
at
corner
541
house
Ashford
on
Avenue,
Heathery Road,
Park
with
Avenue.
his wife.
And during
3
his
children.
tenure, here you go.
He was an
Peter,
electrician.
you asked me this question
He
last
chaired
time.
the 75th anniversary
McKinley,
committee,
and Lincoln
which the
Avenue.
Democrats conceded was the biggest mistake they ever made, putting a
Oil
Republican
Code
to chair
was
on
enacted.
the
Did you want to know
75th
that
anniversary
also?
committee.
Same year.
Because that's where
And the
he
traffic
got
light was
recognition.
approved for Ashford Avenue and Abington.
He was a member of the
They just
100th
took away
anniversary
a few
committee,
years ago.
vice
and
president,
now
and very active in
want it
Kiwanis.
back, but it's too late.
So now came the town park lawsuit.
It was followed by
That's a whole
Charles
nother
Ford
story.
Church.
We'll take that question at the end after I finish with the others, if you want to ask that question.
One correction.
Sure.
Charles Ford Church. He was mayor
That
from 45 to
Ashford Park
48.
opened.
Had been commander of the Ardsley American Legion Post and president of the local Lions Club. There were a lot of those organizations in those days, mostly for men.
You mean when we
He lived
purchased the
at
land
number
for
4
that
Abington
from
Avenue, across
No,
from
no,
Mayor
no.
Denari.
Dick Fontana
He
appointed
was a
me
banker
to
by
the
profession.
commission. And I
His
think
wife was killed in a New York City
78,
subway.
and the park had not yet
All I know
opened
about
at that point.
2 children, mail delivery in Ardsley began
Man,
houses
and the money
rather
came
than
from
having
the
to
state.
pay from the
Yeah.
post office.
Under,
That was in
when I was on the board,
1910.
under Powell, we started talking
Do
about
it.
it. Things took a long time to happen here. The government operates very slowly at all levels, we're all aware of that. Getting funding,
We've got one
getting
more.
approval, getting the public behind you, et cetera, there's a lot involved in it.
Now, when we needed
The
a
town park
picture,
litigation, it took years and years,
the judge,
and then we all know where that
carried from the left.
So
We didn't have a
anyone
picture
has
of
question
Fran
about
McCormick.
that,
I
that's the
couldn't
second
imagine
question.
we had no pictures of Fran
For
McCormick,
that.
except this picture.
Anyway, Dick Fontana, I eulogized him at his funeral.
Now, so this is a
Later, his
picture of
children
probably his serving as
gave me
a
his
judge.
Ardsley license plate. We
But
sat
he
together
and
on the
Fran
board
McCormick
next to
nor
one
his
another.
predecessor,
I suppose I had something to do with getting him elected mayor.
were lawyers.
Through
So
those
they
other
chose
events.
not to wear
And
judge's robes.
there he was.
Entitled to it.
Later, he ran unsuccessfully for
That's
assembly,
why
and also for
I think
supervisor
this is a-
against Democrats who were in office already.
Despite the fact
And that was his story.
But Fran
And
McCormick,
then came
when I
Marie
got to know
Stelfeld,
that,
who was
he was a gentleman.
the second
He was mayor from
woman
48 to 49
after
after
trustee
serving
of
as
the
village
village
trustee
parks
from
in Towns,
1943.
I mentioned earlier.
He had been a school board trustee. Now, there are
She
4
was on the
positions,
board
elected
from
positions
77 to
in the
83.
village of Ardsley.
She was
School board
Republican,
trustee, Fran
and
McCormick,
I capitalized
in
on it.
1930. Village trustee, yes.
She was the only woman
1943.
elected mayor or
Mayor
president
of the
in
village,
village
yes,
history.
was elected mayor of the
Now you're
village
going
in
to say, well, what
48.
about the current
Judge
woman?
in the village. They served
Well,
20 years.
what I meant to add here was in a contested election.
He died at age 89 in 1983.
Eventually, she was defeated by Mayor David in
Lived
1989.
at number 5.
She lived at
Judson
28
with
Abington
Margaret
Avenue with
and
Bob,
6
her
children.
husband, a son and a
Was one of the
daughter.
founders of OLPH.
She had been a chemist
And I
for
believe
her village
the first
service.
Catholic mayor.
But while serving as mayor, she was basically a full-time mayor in the sense that she didn't have
And
an
that,
outside
does that wrap up that
occupation.
page?
So
One
consequently,
question. Sure.
she was here, she was a very hard worker. She was here in Village Hall every day. She had been very active in the
Well,
girls
there were a couple
softball teams,
who
winners
left
just
off
about
at
every
Berlin.
year. She worked
Couple
very hard.
We
and
haven't
often,
gotten them to yet, but I want to mention their names.
And she had
Adamant
basically
and Phocos both died in
a
office, so someone else came.
During her tenure, the library building opened,
Although the mayors and presidents were.
and the board rejected the town park entry.
Odd numbered years. More than 2 resigned mayor on this being already
The office
Mort was a Democrat, he'd been a trustee
So,
from
that's why
84,
some of the terms
89, and
were
5 years.
on different years.
He resided and still
Yes,
does
we
with
go
Joan,
over.
who's here,
Sure, and why don't you come right here?
at
Then I can
44
speak to
Granville
you.
Brook Road.
I don't wanna
Was
be
a
the
former
center
high
of
school
attraction.
social studies teacher.
I promise you won't get
Where was it, Taft?
Don't,
in New York.
In New York,
don't,
and then Dean of Students.
You look so nice in your
Art
red
also.
assistant principal at Taft.
Yes,
well, there are two
so when I
questions.
said teachers, there were 2 teachers, and the other one was Duke.
Is
who
that
was a
flag
shop
on the
teacher
wrong
who
side
was,
then?
He was the first Jewish
Yes,
mayor.
it is. And the flag should be here where it is here, and it's supposed to be on the side. Yes.
The second.
We had a problem with the old building, in that there wasn't a spot on
During his tenure,
the
the
property
control
side.
project.
And then over here is the ramp, so sometimes you have to negotiate a little bit. But you were absolutely right.
Municipal building renovations were
The
completed.
flag should be.
Mentioned by
Now,
Kate.
let's see if the calendar is right, because maybe it's a reverse picture. It seems to be
And now we move on
N-O-V-E-N-B-E-R.
to Mike Pocost, who
Second
succeeded
question.
Mort after one term in office. Mike had been a Democrat, he had been brought onto the board
I
as a
said
Democrat.
that, well, Denari
He,
was
um,
at 7,
Had been a
and I
trustee
think
from
Borchers was
1985
at
to
4. Does that
91.
make sense to you?
It's not on the sheet.
He,
No, it isn't.
was- resided
So my
on
notes,
Beacon
um,
Drive and then later moved to 6 Rock Ridge
properly
Road with his wife
extrapolated.
Carol and 2
If
daughters.
that's the case.
He was a member of the village planning
Okay.
board before serving as
If no other
mayor.
questions, we go on to
His
page
profession
2.
was lawyer and lobbyist for New York
So
City
now we
Manufacturing
begin
Association.
with,
And
Alden
in the election, he was in
And this is what I have to say about him.
Mike,
He was actually mayor less than 1 term. So he served from 1949 to 1950.
3-2 majority in favor of the
Nope,
Democrats
that's wrong.
became overnight,
It says 1951.
even before they,
Maybe that was the
numbers
reason
were
for your
dry
question.
on the tabulation.
He had been a village trustee from
2 to 3.
47 to 49,
And
president of
then,
the Lions Club,
a year
mayor
later,
of the volunteer fire department,
was it,
married 2
Mike
daughters.
Pocost was elected.
I have him as 7.
Unfortunately, he didn't serve very
From
long.
1939
I
to
think he only
1950.
attended meetings.
Why did he
from
resign?
April to
And I said already, no one had been impeached.
Oh, perhaps Junior
He
July.
left Ardsley for
John
South
Kent's
America
He
with
succumbed
the
in
U.S. Rubber
December
Company, for whom he worked for
1991.
4 years.
Um,
He returned to the U.S. in 1954, settled in Yonkers, where he lived until his death at age
was
89
in
in
New York City
1983.
politics.
During his term, 21 acres was open as the
City Hall.
development
And he
on
invited me in to
Ashford
see
Avenue coming.
what
It
it
looked like
There was no council
And
session at the time.
also Huntley
But I
Estates
found it
Phase
interesting.
1 was approved, as well as
He
the
knew his way
relocation of the
around
railroad station
government,
from the east side of the tracks to
probably
the
as
top
well
of the
as
side.
any of our local
In
people.
1950,
Certainly
village
myself
population was
included, did.
2,267,
And,
about half of what it is
anyway,
500.
but unfortunately, he served as
So
a
that's
judge.
Albert Denari left.
And now, we're up to the last one, John Morehouse. So when Mike passed away, thank you, Peter. So when Mike passed away, the board was now divided, and it was really divided, 2 to 2. 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans. Dan Kelly was one of the Republicans, John Morehouse was one of the 2 Democrats. And they were loggerheads, because those were the years when there was a lot of infighting in the board. Went back to the days when Marie was mayor, Mort was mayor, the short time was mayor. And so they had to have a shootout, and if you don't like that expression, it was the first one that came to my mind. No, not like Hamilton and Burr, nothing like that at all. But it came down to a special election to fill the seat. So in March of 1992, there was this special election, and Dan Kelly and, yeah, I got the year right, and John Morehouse faced each other. So for the 3 months between December, when Mike died, and March, the election, there was no mayor of Ardsley. There was what you might call an acting mayor, but really a very unofficial title. I think, what did they do? They shared the office. Somebody sat here for the first meeting, and then the next month, or 2 weeks later, the other person, something like that. I mean, I think that's what they did, because that would make the most sense. And then finally, at the election, John Morehouse was ultimately successful. And John, who later became acting judge, or assistant judge in Ardsley, was the mayor. He won the special election. He was a Democrat. He had been a trustee from 89 to 92. a lawyer for a New York City insurance company, involved in pension planning, that kind of thing. Married to Ellen, son and a daughter. They lived at 26 Eastern Drive, right next door to where Mayor Payne had lived. Now they live over off Jackson Avenue. And he served during the Village Centennial. And that's about it. Any questions on the last 4 or 5 years? I'll come back to you more anyway. Yes, Richard.
What could you tell us about political parties? Because the first two were independent, then the Republicans came. Was
Okay.
there a Democrat? What do you know about the parties?
Okay. A lot, too much. And that may be where I tread on tough ground. So, Daniel Lawrence was an independent. I mean, there were no parties in those days. There were no parties when George Washington ran for the first time either. Ooh, that's another connection, nexus. So now I learn, though, that now you had a contest for president between Adamant and Lawrence, and although they're both Republicans, I learned that. So independent, probably independent, because I don't think anyone ran against him. He succeeded after 4 short years. Republican, yes, staunch Republican. I know that for a fact. And a more liberal Republican who defeated him. And then I think the first Democrat comes all the way here in 1948, Fran McCormick, who may also, and I was asking this question when I arrived, there were just a couple of people in the audience, I was asking who the first Catholic president was, because that's often associated with Democrats, I mean in the old days, and I'm careful when I say that, I'm trying to be careful, but I think Fran McCormick was definitely the first Democratic president in Ardsley, and I think he may have been the first Catholic president as well. Borchers was not Catholic, Seitz was definitely not Catholic. Smith, Dr. Smith, we'll get to him shortly, he was a dentist. I don't think he was, but I don't know for sure. And Adamant was not. So they were, so your question had to do with politics. So the only independents would have been the first two, and then just to tell you who the Democratic presidents were real quick, or mayors, Democrat Zito, Democrat Dick Payne, Democrat Bud Powell, Democrat Mort David, Democrat / turned Republican Mike Pocost, John Morehouse Democrat, and then the current ones have been Democrat.
One
Yes,
question.
sure.
It appears some of the mayors serve 3-year terms as opposed to the current 2-year term.
Well, there were a couple who left office early, and a couple who died. We haven't gotten them to yet, but I want to mention their names. Adamant and Pocost both died in office, so someone else came immediately after, and may have been an even year, although the mayors and presidents were generally elected in the odd-numbered years. And 2 resigned while in office, Denari and Payne. So that's why some of the terms may have ended on different years. Any questions? Yes?
One interesting point you just mentioned, the population of Ardsley in 1960 is 4,000. We've barely grown since then.
You're right. I knew that from the census in, let's see, 10 years ago and 12 years and 20 years ago, it was almost static, almost exactly the same. Since then, we've added a little population, but some of the areas that describe themselves as Ardsley, as you and I know, are not in the village proper limits as such. They're in the Ardsley School District. There's Ardsley, and then there's Ardsley on Hudson. At one point, I checked a couple of things. I went down to the post office, I checked the school district, etc. So the village of Ardsley was, round numbers, 4,500 people, let's say 10 years ago. The Ardsley post office, Richard, you're in the Ardsley POR?
Yes.
Was 8,900, so that's double the size of the village. And the Ardsley School District was about 11,005. So the village of Ardsley, Incorporated,
is only 40% of the school district. Now, we're talking overall population, we're not talking student population. Student population today is about 2,300, I